From the Mumbai studios of Republic TV, it's time for Arnab Goswami on The Debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, in a completely new twist in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Putin has claimed that the troops are being withdrawn. He's calling it a victory with no shots fired. Russia is painting this as a defeat of Western propaganda. Has Putin made his point? Can he be believed? Who has outsmarted whom? Here are the developments and then the global debate.
As the Pentagon raised alarm over a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine,
I would just say this, that he continues to advance his readiness should he choose to go down a military path here. Should he choose to invade again, he is doing all the things you would expect him to do to make sure he's ready for that option or options.
as the US announced it will close its embassy in Kiev and move all remaining staffers there to a city near the Polish border, as the British Prime Minister hinted at Russian action in the next 48 hours.
We think that they have a huge preparation ready to go at virtually any time. 130,000 troops or more, a huge number of more than 90 battalion tactical groups, and they're stationed around the Ukrainian border.
And as the Ukraine president spoke of a possible attack by Wednesday.
Ми прагнемо миру. І ми хочемо вирішувати всі питання, виключно шляхом переговорів. Я зараз пропоную вам протягом 24 годин повернутися на батьківщину і стати пліч-опліч з українською армією, з нашою дипломатією, з нашим народом. Нам кажуть, що 16 лютого стане днем нападу. Ми зробимо його днем єднання.
Russia underscores a point by claiming victory as deadline after deadline set by Western media about a Russian invasion of Ukraine has been missed by a wide margin. But then the big one set by Ukrainian President Zelensky himself is there, and that's tomorrow. Let's see if there's a war.
The troop withdrawal has begun.
Подразделения Южного и Западного военных округов, выполнившие задачи, уже приступили к погрузке на железнодорожный и автомобильный транспорт и сегодня начнут движение в свои воинские гарнизоны.
Russia claims Russian soldiers have begun returning to their permanent bases. Ukraine, on the other hand, remains skeptical, saying we'll believe when we see.
There are signs from Moscow that diplomacy should continue. This gives grounds for cautious optimism. But we will not compromise on our core principles. Every nation has the right to choose its own path.
The NATO continues to remain firm on its position.
З Російської Федерації постійно лунають різні заяви, тому у нас є вже правило, не почуємо, тоді повіримо, а побачимо, тоді повіримо. Побачимо відведення, повіримо у деескалацію.
So does this mean that the war has been averted with Russia capitulating? Or was all the geopolitical posturing of the West hollow propaganda to distract from domestic concerns? The next 24 hours could just determine whether a war has been averted or an invasion is on the horizon. Let's debate.
global panel tonight. I have General Bakshi. I have with us Philip Chuk-Vasyl. He's a Ukrainian diplomat and he's a former spokesperson of the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's joining us from Kiev. Alina Lunova is Advocacy Director of the Human Rights Center, and she's joining us from Ukraine. Dov Zekim is former Undersecretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration, currently Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. George Beebe is Vice President of the Center for the National Interest, and he's a former Director of the Russia Analysis at the CIA and author of a book on how the US and Russia might stumble into war called The Russia Trap. Andrew K.P. Leung is an independent and a China strategist. We have with us there Nikolai Petrov is Senior Research Fellow on the Russia and Eurasia program at the very prestigious Chatham House in London. He's also the head of the Center for Political Geographic Researching at Moscow. He's joining us from London. And I think I have Brian McDonald. He's journalist and head of the Russia desk in Moscow. He's joining us right now. Brian, you're in Moscow. I want to start by asking you, pardon me?
I'm in Sochi, not Moscow, but yes, go on.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. Brian, is the standoff really coming down, or is it still posturing? Are we with Russia saying it's pulling back the troops, can they be trusted?
Well, I mean, nobody can be trusted in this exchange at the moment. I mean, you've got, American intelligence services saying Russia's going to invade at 3 o'clock this morning, Moscow time, according to the Sun newspaper. You've got the Russians saying they've withdrawn troops, but obviously that can't be verified. I mean, Ukraine said it's still skeptical about whether that's true or not. NATO has said that it's optimistic or cautiously optimistic upon hearing the news. Russia itself obviously has pledged that the troops are being pulled back from Belarus and from the southern and western military divisions. I mean, obviously you have to take that on trust at the moment, unless, of course, satellite images emerge. It does seem, however, that the rhetoric on all sides has de-escalated substantially in the last 2 days. I mean, and you must remember as well that from the Ukrainian side, Ukraine has always said, officially at least, that it does not, it does not fall in line with these threats of an imminent invasion. Russia has always said that it doesn't intend to invade, and the only people who've been saying that there's going to be an invasion are the American intelligence services. I mean, like the French, for example, have not pulled their embassy out of Kiev. It's the Americans who've taken that out of Kiev and moved it to Lviv, which is a city in western Ukraine, close to the Polish border. Beautiful city, actually, over there. And so most of the noise here is coming from the British and American media, with a couple of German outlets like the Bild Zeitung, for example, and coming from, the American government. It's not coming from the Ukrainian government. It's not coming from the Russian government. So I think that's important to, bear in mind. But as to whether there's de-escalation, it appears that it is happening, and it's certainly the Russians have said that they've withdrawn the troops anyway.
Well, what would be? Let me take it to Mr. Vasyl, who is in Kiev. What would be Putin's thinking behind wanting to de-escalate? He's been putting the pressure. I don't know if he's yielded a dividend yet. He could have put more pressure for a couple of more days at least.
Why you think he de-escalated or he wants to de-escalate? I do not see any single sign that he de-escalated or willing to de-escalate. We have a really paradoxical situation. Putin attacked Ukraine in 2014. He invaded Crimea, Ukrainian part. He supported separatists in eastern Ukraine. Twice his army attacked Ukrainian army during war on Donbass in 2014-15. So for us, basically nothing changed compared to what we have been watching for the last 7 years. And the only thing we changed was beginning of this information strange hysteria some months ago in Western media, and then Putin responds with even more ridiculous proposals to Americans and NATO about new security arrangements. So basically, it's only different in this exchange. Why you think that by moving troops closer to Ukrainian border or back to mainland, Putin decided to escalate? He is challenging not really Ukraine. He's challenging US. He wants to have back a bipolar world as it used to be during Cold He has very complex relationship with Europe, and he is mainly targeting them. And we are just an element of this wider game. On Ukraine, there is no any clarity about getting out of current deadlock with Russians, as we do not see any progress on Minsk implementation from any side, as we do not see any way to get an agreement with Russians on our foreign policy.
But then, Mr. Vassal, let me get it, Nikolai Petrov in. Why did the chief spokesperson for the Russian Defense Ministry announce and say unilaterally that units of the western and southern military districts are packing up and moving to their garrisons? What was the need to make that announcement? That looked to us at least as some kind of de-escalation. Mr. Petrov, is it de-escalation? Are we reading too much into it?
Well, first of all, I would differ between rhetoric, media escalation, and escalation on the ground. And second, it has been announced yesterday that troops are those troops which did fulfill their mission in military training exercises will move back. So I don't think that this changes the situation entirely. And here I would agree with my Ukrainian colleague that there is not the war or potential war between Russia and Ukraine. There is a large-scale conflict between Russia and the United States, and we do see maneuvering. And so far, in my view, we do see only the first round of this clash.
Well, but Dov, isn't this embarrassing for the Biden administration? Because maybe that's what Putin's intent is. Within 5 days of NSA, Jake Sullivan saying there's a credible prospect that Russian military action will take place even before the end of the Olympics, they are potentially pulling back their troops. So this could be Putin calling out the warmongering of the West.
No, I don't think so. I mean, frankly, a war would be worse for Biden after what happened in Afghanistan. I think that what Putin, first of all, we don't know that Putin will not try to do anything on the ground militarily, but as has already been said, we'll find out pretty soon from various sources whether they've really pulled back. Putin has already accomplished a lot. He's gotten the West, and not just the United States, by the way. If you look at who's been supplying Ukraine, it's a whole bunch of countries. German Chancellor Scholz was also in Moscow and Kyiv, as was Macron. So it's not just America involved here. But Putin has accomplished opening a dialogue on terms that he has raised for many years. So that already is an accomplishment. And if war can be averted, which would be a good thing, that's not going to hurt Mr. Biden at all. And most people will breathe a sigh of relief, and then we'll have to get down to some very, very tough negotiations.
Where does America stand in this, Dov? Where does America stand? George, can you take that? Hasn't Biden cried wolf and embarrassed the Americans globally once again? I mean, he was the one who was saying, we're dealing with one of the largest armies in the world. It's a very different situation. Things can go crazy very quickly. We were all shocked at the way he was speaking. His whole narrative for the domestic audience was, George, to give some kind of an illusion of geopolitical dominance when there is none left. And so hasn't crying wolf dented America's own credibility?
Well, I don't think the United States has cried wolf here, and I don't believe that most Americans, or indeed most Europeans, believe that we're crying wolf. Obviously, the Russians have done some things militarily. We have not imagined those forces that are massing near the Ukrainian borders. We're not imagining that Putin has put demands on the table for an agreement with NATO and the United States over the non-expansion of the NATO alliance any further eastward. We're not imagining that he has threatened to use what he calls military technical means if the West completely rejects Russia's demands. So that's not crying wolf. What I think is happening right now is that the Russians are modulating the pressure that they are putting on in this situation. I don't think that invading Ukraine is Putin's first preference. What he actually wants is some sort of understanding with the West, particularly with the United States, that is mutually acceptable, that respects Russia's red lines here. He's trying to see what he can get. How far can he advance Russia's interests here? And I think he's starting to see some possibilities where we might be able to find a mutual agreement. He does not want hysteria over the possibility of an invasion to overtake events and to result in losing control over this situation. And I think over the last week, he's been concerned that concerns about a Russian invasion were just getting too high. So I think he's modulating that pressure. I don't believe he's de-escalating. He's not pulling back entirely, but he's doing enough so that people won't lose all rationality in understanding what's going on here. And in so doing,
clearly,
preserving an
George, he's piling on the pressure and he's enjoying it. He knows Americans are looking weak. He knows the Americans got it wrong in Afghanistan. He knows they got it wrong in Iraq. He knows history. He knows they got it wrong in Vietnam. He's repeatedly saying, and the statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, who said that February 15th will go down in history as the day Western war propaganda failed. What did that mean, Brian? What did that mean? Very clear statement out there. What did that mean? Why was that statement made by Maria?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I was just about to respond to the previous two guys there, George and Doug. Basically, this has damaged American credibility, whether you like it or not, because as we know, something has started in American media over the last decade, particularly with the Trump thing and so on and so forth afterwards, where a lot of the coverage is now completely driven by anonymous sources in the intelligence services in a way that wouldn't have happened 20 to 30 years ago. There was a time when anything the spook said, when I started in journalism anyway, that was you took it with a giant pinch of salt. Now a lot of the news coverage is literally press releases for the intelligence agencies without any correction whatsoever. I mean, some intelligence spook talks to a reporter, especially with the internet now, it's not like newspapers before where things had to gestate over a day or two. It's online in a half an hour, and it's 3 sources with information, or this anonymous fella or this anonymous woman or whatever. And it is damaging credibility. We've seen it now from weapons of mass destruction to Russiagate to various things. And the credibility of the American media is certainly diminished from where it was 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I was a younger person. And, and I think what Maria Zakharova is getting at there is that it would not surprise me if a lot of this has been pushed by the Russians in order to damage the credibility of the American media even further, to bring it to the point where no one's going to believe them in future. I mean, if you go on Twitter or these social networks now,
Brian, are you suggesting? Are you suggesting? Because this is sorry to intervene. Are you suggesting?
In 2022.
Are you suggesting? Sorry to intervene. Are you suggesting that there's a possibility that all of this could have been planted by the Russians on the American and the Western media? That there's a war coming?
It's very possible that a lot of this intelligence is being planted by the Russians. It's very possible that the CIA and various agencies have got people in Moscow feeding them this stuff, and they think they're sources, and they're just laughing at them and playing them. And it's very possible. Look at Ukraine, for example. I know there's a man trying to get in there right now. Look at Kiev, for example. A source that I know, close to the Zelensky administration in Kiev, said to me the other day that when this all started back in October, November, the Kiev government, the present Kiev government, went along with it because they thought, oh, this is great, we're going to get loads of weapons out of this and money and so on. And then it just got so out of control that in the last few weeks, they've just been trying to control a monster. And as the speaker said, Ukraine is being used as a pawn here. And this is really between the Russians and the Americans. And the Ukrainians are unfortunately, and on a personal level, I feel great empathy for them. They're stuck in the middle of 2 military superpowers, and they're the ones that are suffering. They're the ones that, economically are suffering.
I don't know, Brian, whether this is completely true or apocryphal, but the bottom line is a fascinating theory, Dove, that the entire world got into a fright. And I want to just bounce this off Alina, who's not spoken. She's in Ukraine. What do you think about this possibility that's being pushed here by Brian, that this whole thing was actually planted by the Russians and the whole world got into a fright about, led by the Western media, about the possibility of a Russian, Russian invasion? Alina.
Yes, I believe the truth is somehow in the middle. So, of course, we want the aggression of Russia Federation, and we are ready to one new wave of this aggression. And we saw the troops near our borders, and we saw the block of Black Sea. On the other hand, of course, inside the Ukraine, we understand that the situation not really the way in which European and USA media interpret this, because we really feel calm in Ukraine, and really somehow when we see international media, it's really controversial feelings called.
No, I don't know who is using whom out here. We're getting confused. General Bakshi, how much of it is fiction and how much of it was a reality? Now we are asking ourselves the fundamental questions. Every news channel, every media outlet in the world today, Brian, is talking about the possibility of World War III. So yes, it's been a double-edged weapon. Putin has suddenly war-gamed this out, and if he has done the reverse engineering of it, whereas sort of General Bakshi, where he realizes he holds the cards, he decides when to pull back, he decides when to ease the pressure, he decides when to apply the pressure. But how is NATO going to look? How is America going to look at the end of this? General Bakshi from Delhi.
Arnab, absolutely. Let me make 3 quick points. Number one, the fact of the declaration of a partial withdrawal. Putin has called it partial when he was having the press conference, right?
Yep.
It is a partial withdrawal. The figures being said are 10,000. As of now, no satellite imagery evidence. Apropos that whether it was all fiction, I'm not so sure. The fact is that as per some estimates, out of the 12 Russian combined arms armies, that is the equivalent of our corps, 11 were deployed for exercises in their own territories surrounding the Ukraine from 3 sides. The 41 army had moved into Belarus for joint exercises, about 30,000 men, along with, the photographs have been picked up of the Su-35 fighter bombers. I mean, they are there for the world to see, along with the S-400, S-500s to cover deep inside there. Don't forget that from the point of view of geographical positioning, any force posture in the Belarus puts the gives the Russians a capability to strike at Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. From Donbass, they could have struck out towards Kharkiv, the former capital. From Crimea, they could have come up towards the Mariupol port and the Odessa port. So there are a number of these options which have been war-gamed. The deployment was real, still is real. A partial pullback doesn't mean he's called it off. You are very right. Putin has the initiative. He's calling the shot. What is at stake is the media war. He wants to win the media war. The Americans have been crying from the rooftops, so have the Ukrainians. Tomorrow is that invasion day. Nothing happens tomorrow.
Yeah, then what happens?
A lot of people look like fools.
Yeah, it's a boy. That's
Nothing happens tomorrow. A lot of people look like fools.
No, that's
but Arnab, can I just
all right,
finish?
that's okay.
Arnab, can I just
please, General, I'm not stopping you. Yeah.
Arnab, there have been 2 announcements today from Moscow. One was about the troop withdrawal by the Minister of Defense himself. The second was that the Russian Duma has said that the whole of Donbass region, the 2 republics, they have recognized them. This is like a slap in the face of the Ukraine. This amounts to a big challenge to the Minsk.
I have this theory
taking place.
Okay,
and if Ukraine reacts, Russia has the perfect excuse to go all out.
Yeah, okay. So I want to get a view from China, from Andrew KP Leung. How is China looking at all this? Must be enjoying it from a distance, really. Great fun. The entire West is in a tizzy. China is enjoying all this. The focus is away from COVID and everything that China has allegedly done. Great moment must be for China. What do you think? Andrew?
Well, China definitely would not like to be involved in this militarily. But nevertheless, China has supported openly Russia's security concerns. Because as far as Russia is concerned, the game plan is to restore the kind of buffer zone that applied to the former USSR. Now, let's not also forget that during the past couple of days, President Putin also spoke to President Biden, or Biden's trying to speak to President Putin, and a number of European leaders without getting anything. So why should Russia back down now? So it doesn't make sense. The only reason why the Russia is withdrawing, appears to be withdrawing, is to really make President Biden lose a little bit of face, because the United States, including President Biden, is making a lot of song and dance about this particular date of the 16th. Now, there is no reason why Putin wants to stick to that date. He can delay it maybe after the Winter Olympics. And it's definitely because he's amassed something like 170,000 troops in the border, together with emergency military supplies, including emergency blood supplies even. So why should he back down now? There's no reason. Obviously, especially when he's not getting what he wants. So I think this
almost sounds like you don't want him to back down. Almost sounds like the Chinese don't want him to back down. You got a lot vested in Putin, and that's why I began by saying that you're obviously enjoying it. Okay, no aspersions here. I have Professor Dr. Vladimir Firkin. He's Chair of Regional Studies and Foreign Policy Envoy Extraordinary Minister, member RISA, member BISA, very senior man joining us from Moscow. Professor, thank you for joining us. Yesterday you were quite provocative, and I want to get you into a debate with the Americans. Okay, we lost the audio with Professor Vladimir, but okay, let me put a theory here. George, I think Biden has been played. You see, his approval ratings were pathetic, around 40%. He was staring at midterms in America very soon, right? He needed a war. He thought it's a good time, and so he got played. Is that a possibility?
Well, I think it's certainly true that Biden's popularity ratings have been poor. He's had a series of political problems domestically. The botched withdrawal from Afghanistan did not help the situation. We have rising inflation levels. We've not been able to get the COVID pandemic under control. All of that is hurting him. That said, I don't think he sought some sort of confrontation with the Russians here. In fact, he was hoping, and the thrust of his policy toward Russia since the beginning of his administration has been to stabilize relations with the Russians, to make them more predictable, less susceptible to instability. Now, Putin, I think, saw an opportunity here. The confluence of all these different factors told him that he had a window within which he could press for what for Russia would be a historic redefinition of Europe's security architecture. This is something that Russians have been complaining about since early in the post-Cold War period. Yeltsin complained about this back in the early 1990s, accusing the West of creating what he called a cold peace in Europe and taking advantage of Russian weakness to expand NATO. The Russians have not stopped worrying about this. Putin right now looks at the balance of power, the balance of capabilities between Russia and the West right now, and sees an opportunity to strike a new deal over all of this. And he's trying his best to take advantage of that.
I'd like to bring in Professor Vladimir. Can you hear me, Professor Vladimir, now?
Do you hear me now or not?
Yeah, I can hear you. Has Putin achieved as much as he could have, should have? You know, if he pulls back now, if he does. My question, and Dov on the other side debating with you from Washington, would he have achieved enough? Would he have achieved his basic strategic objectives if he pulls back now?
If you're asking me, I'd say the answer is partially, but not completely.
Okay, let me get that.
The reason I say that is, yes.
Okay. Why don't you complete? Then I'll get Dr. Vladimir in. Yeah.
Okay. The reason I say partially is he's getting the West to talk to him about issues that were not discussed for years, as George just pointed out. But they haven't given him anything. That's number one. Number two, it's not a pure victory for him because from Biden's perspective, the last thing he needed was another war. So getting away from that and being able to say, for example, that the sanctions were one of the reasons that Putin backed off, whether we know that or not, that actually helps Biden. So I don't think his poll standings are a factor. The real issue for, I think, Putin was first of all to divide NATO. That has definitely failed. The other issue was to get things on the negotiating table that were not there before. To that extent, he succeeded. Now the issue for him is how much does he actually get at that negotiating table? And that's still very much open to question.
Okay. Professor Vladimir, what do you think Putin is going to do now?
What is going to do now? First of all, I would like to say to you and to the distinguished audience that the repeating gossips about the Russian invasion to Ukraine seems to be a kind of manic madness. If I were a psychologist, I could call it so. That is manic madness. There was never such an idea of the part of Russia as to invade Ukraine. That is the first. The second is that as I am politologist, I could say that it is a kind of wishful thing, wishful sleeping, because somebody in the West and in the NATO would like very much the war between Ukraine and Russia, but neither Russia does want this war nor in Ukraine, as President Zelensky said that they are not eager to wage a war now against Russia. He said that he can solve these problems in diplomatic way. So as to what President Putin would like to do now, it's quite evident. He would like a peaceful solution of all questions which divide now Russia and Ukraine, and not only Russia and Ukraine, but also Ukraine itself. Because what is going now in Ukraine, it is a civil war between the eastern provinces, Lugansk and Donetsk, and Kiev. And the only possible legal platform for solution of this crisis would be the Minsk agreement. And Russia insists that Minsk agreement should be fulfilled, first of all, by Kiev. If not, then the war will continue. And the Russian public opinion supports the people of eastern provinces of Ukraine because what is happening now there is a genocide. I have students from Donetsk, from Lugansk in my university, and they say that this terrible artillery shootings against Donetsk and Lugansk, which were some times ago, were terrible because the people died in spite of it. Why should the people die in a peaceful time? And the public opinion in Russia is seriously thinking about recognizing these republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. And
You make it look so easy, Professor. Professor Vladimir. Mr. Vasil wants to respond from Kiev. You make it look so easy. You say that we had never got any aggressive intentions on Ukraine. There are brothers. Then why did you amass 100,000 troops on their border? Mr. Vasil wants to respond to you, please. And even now, you're putting pressure on them.
Well, first of all, on the record.
Okay. Mr. Vasil responding. He's a former spokesperson of the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's responding to you, sir.
To claim that we have civil war. If there was no Russian invasion in 2014, there would be no war at all. It's Russia's responsibility for illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory in Crimea. It's Russian responsibility in sending troops, arms, thousands of guns of tanks to Donetsk. If there was no Russia, there would be nothing in Donbass. It would be as peaceful and prosperous as it used to be before 2014. So please don't put this headache on our head. It's your responsibility. Let's stop it. Where I agree with you that neither Ukrainians nor Russians want this war. But what is really important, it's not 2014, it's not Crimea. Today, if Russia invaded Ukraine, it would be suicide for Russia, first of all, because Russian tanks and soldiers will not be welcomed here with flowers. There would be every street, there would be hell for Russian soldiers, and I presume Russian intelligence and political authorities are aware about it, that it would be Second World War scale of fighting, which would be suicide for Russia as well, which would be horrible result for both countries, but which would be also end for Russian imperialism as well. I am pretty sure in this. But I would like to turn this into something more important here. Yes, it's good that sides talk. Yes, it's very good that Putin give a chance for diplomacy. European architecture of security has been destroyed. And we are the victim of the destruction of this European security architecture. And we must come to the table, all of us, we must come to the table and peacefully discuss our disagreements and agree how new European security should look like. And it's not only for Europe important, it's important even for countries which are present here, like India or China, because don't forget, Ukraine is the only country peacefully denounced nuclear arms, received guarantees from countries from UN Security Council, and then Ukraine was attacked by one of UN Security Council members. So if Ukrainian conflict will not be settled with respect to our territorial integrity and return Crimea and Donbass to Ukraine, then all the countries in the world will have to learn the lessons that accept nuclear weapons. There is no any other way to defend countries.
I think one point which I want Brian to come in on, I think, is it a foregone conclusion that Russia will walk over Ukraine whenever it wants? Because the voices we hear from Ukraine are there will be bloody fighting and Putin may be biting off more than he can chew. It's all right to apply the pressure when it's one-sided, Brian, but everyone's saying from Ukraine that Ukraine is not Crimea, 2022 is not 2014 or 2015.
First of all, in answer to your question, what Vasily just said a second ago, Ukraine was not the only country to give up its nuclear weapons. Kazakhstan and Belarus also did, by the way, and the United Kingdom and the US have breached the terms of the Budapest Memorandum regarding Belarus by interfering in its domestic politics. But anyway, that's another question. About that, there is no doubt that any Russian incursion into Ukraine now would not be like Crimea in 2014. In Crimea, about 90% of the population were kind of pro-Russian. Barely a shot was fired. The Ukrainian Navy, most of them defected to Russia at the time, as you will remember, including the commander. That would not happen now. There is no way the Ukrainian military in Kyiv or Lviv or Dnipropetrovsk is going to defect to the Russian side. That's not going to happen. But the point about it is that there's a misconception here, I think, that if there were a Russian invasion of Ukraine, which I don't think there will be, that it would be a Second World War type conflict. I mean, Russia has like America, Russia has overwhelming air, missile, and technological superiority over Ukraine. It'd be much more like what Ukraine did in Iraq back in, or it's not Ukraine, sorry, the USA did when it legally invaded Iraq 20 years ago. It'd be much more like that than it would be like, Stalingrad or something. I mean, they're not, they're not going to send in 500,000 men, or women nowadays and try to occupy cities. That's not going to happen. I mean, if there ever were a war between Russia and Ukraine, it would be something more like Desert Storm than Operation Barbarossa. I mean, that's the reality. Of course, nobody wants that war. And what Vasily said is totally correct. Nobody in Russia or Ukraine wants a war. And what Russia wants is the European security architecture to be redesigned. Because one thing I'd like to say is that we're talking about that the Soviet Union broke up 30 years ago. The reality is the Soviet Union is still breaking up. The Soviet Union broke up in such a way that a lot of ethnic divisions, a lot of the territorial, stuff was left unresolved in 1991. For example, Crimea had been part of Russia before the Soviet Union was created. It ended up in Ukraine. In 91, it continued like that. There's also disputes in Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Transdniester. There's a situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh. There are numerous issues resulting from the dissolution of the Soviet Union that had never been resolved. And what the West has been doing, let me finish, what the West has been doing is it's been using Cold War architecture to deal with a post-Cold War world. NATO is a Cold War institution. And what it's done is it's created a situation of a zero-sum game. And that's where a lot of the problems are coming from.
Okay, now, so I'd like to hear from Dove. First of all, you took the example of Iraq. And you know that the fact is that America initially all supported Saddam Hussein through the 1980s, and they used them vis-a-vis Iran. And then they entered Iran on claims of WMDs which were never found. So the Iraq example is an example of a country that got it completely wrong. My question is, and Dove, just taking off from what Brian McDonald said, can Russia afford to make a mistake like that? Because I see a lot of resistance. One may agree or not agree, but there is resistance from the Ukrainians. At least a sizable section say we'll fight you on every street. We're not going to welcome you with roses. Given Russia's the economic compulsions it has, it wants to be part of a leader of a European security architecture, but it's also got financial dealings. It's got so much at stake. Can it afford a long-drawn conflict in Ukraine? Not a quick one. Can it afford a long-drawn conflict in or with Ukraine, Dove?
I think the answer is absolutely not. And I would argue that whatever their control of the air or control of technology, the fact is the Ukrainians are going to fight them tooth and nail. It'll be partly a conventional war. Nikolai. And if the Ukrainians are pushed all the way back, and remember, they're being resupplied. They've got trainers coming in from NATO. There will be massive sanctions imposed on them. It's going to be really costly. And of course, Putin remembers what happened to him in Afghanistan and the Soviet Union. So it seems to me that one of the reasons Putin has decided to, as it were, modulate, to use the word that I think George used, is simply he's got the West paying attention to him. He's got the West ready to talk to him. Why take the kinds of risks? Remember, when you start a war, you never know how it's going to finish. Yep. Never.
Yep.
And Russia clearly may be on paper stronger, but that doesn't mean it's going to win. And that would mean the end of Putin's regime as well, just like it meant the end of the Soviet regime. So I would argue that he has no real incentive to do anything more than perhaps bite off a small slice of Ukraine. He may not even want to do that anymore. He's got the West talking to him, and he will come out and say he won, but I don't know what winning means unless he gets something out of the West, which isn't clear yet.
Question is, those who've studied Putin know he's a very hard-nosed and very unconventional negotiator. And therefore he's difficult to predict. He's not a conventional politician. Whether a slice of Ukraine is what he wants or whether he wants a bigger global game, one doesn't know. I saw George put his hand up, General Bakshi. But may I please just go back once to Nikolai Petrov to just take this forward, because I want a perspective there. And Nikolai, you heard what he said there. What would be if would Putin be sitting around saying that I have achieved what I wanted to for now?
Arnab, first of all, I'd like to point that Putin is a very rational man. Although he can use different methods, but there is rather strong rationale behind all his decisions and moves. And in this case, I think he got already something like, eagerness or preparedness of the West to talk to him, but he needs much more. He needs certain fruits of these talks, and before he gets these fruits, he will not go out. And it seems to me that we should have in mind what has happened in Russia earlier last year, when there were certain military preparations. Then it appeared that certain agreements have been achieved between Putin and President Biden. And finally, Putin got pretty much disappointed. So I would attract your attention to the fact that now Putin is eager to get results. And these results are not necessarily those which are claimed in his ultimatum. It's understandable, but they should be much more real not just the eagerness to continue negotiations.
Yes, but it must be said that he's played it out so well with the Germans. He knows the Turks will take a position which might be for him. He knows he's got the Chinese backing, and he's also doing it at a time, Alina, when the world is in turmoil. If we were just looking at this as strategy, I'm not taking this is brilliant strategy by Putin, because his timing, the nature of the escalation, and the cards that he holds are all, and I know the Ukrainians may not like to hear this, he's got the control in his hands. But Alina, what is the sense you get from Ukraine? How long is this going to last? Will there be a quick de-escalation, you think, pull back, or will this be a protracted affair?
I personally do not believe in escalation of de-escalation of the conflict because of today's decision of Russian State Duma about the recognition of so-called Lugansk People Republic and Donetsk People Republic. So I believe that the next step could be the escalation on the Donbas region. And really this decision which need to be taken by the Putin, by the president of Russia, if he recognizes these so-called people republics, it will be the next step for negotiations with the East and with the USA counterparts. And also we need to be ready to resist because new wave of Russian aggression could be from the Donbas.
Yeah, of course. Yes, please, George.
I'm not of the opinion that the Russians would be in a military quagmire were they to invade Ukraine. I think that the Russians would make quick work of the Ukrainian military despite Ukraine's resistance and its improved capabilities relative to 2014. The imbalance in military forces is just too great. Ukraine is not a country that geographically is well suited to a long guerrilla resistance movement. That said, I think an actual invasion of Ukraine would result in a geopolitical defeat for the Russians because it would completely destroy relationships with the West that would be very difficult to restore in Putin's lifetime. The Russians would be left with a dependence on China, and they would wind up being China's junior partner geopolitically. I don't believe that's at all where the Russians want to be. I don't think that's where Putin wants to be. I think the natural position for Russia is as an independent player, one of the world's great powers that is not fully committed to either East or West, that has the ability to maneuver, that gives Russia the maximum flexibility to be influential in the world. That's where Putin wants to be. He can't get there if he has to invade Ukraine. He wants to avoid that if possible, so he needs a deal. The challenge he has is that he has backed himself into a bit of a corner. He's laid his revolver on the table and said, let's negotiate. And if the other side refuses to offer him any kind of an acceptable deal, he's in a tough position. So he faces some risks here.
Okay, well, before I go to General Bakshi, Andrew, you agree with that? That one of the things which Putin should be cautious about is becoming over-dependent on China?
Well, Russia has never been a kind of all-weather partner of China, nor China would see Russia in the same light. But on the other hand, both countries are pushed together because of the United States confrontation with Russia and China. There is a lot of common interests, but naturally both sides are not cast iron friends. But I think that what China's position is likely that China does not want to be involved in this militarily, but on the other hand, China does support Russia's security concerns, and unfortunately these security concerns have not been met. So I don't think that Putin would necessarily back down. He's not going to invade Ukraine anytime soon. Yeah. But he's likely to put all the the army, the military forces, just to keep the pressure up.
If there isn't a war, then I can tell you by next year there'll be a lot of doctoral students putting in their PhD thesis with the subject of Putin's psychological warfare. I can tell you, if this is psychological warfare, he has done brinkmanship of another level. What do you think, General Bakshi? Last word to you.
Arnab, 3 quick points. Firstly, as a military analyst, this is not the last that you've heard of it. This crisis is going to continue. Number 1, Putin has got escalation control. He is playing it very flexibly, ratcheting up the pressure, and when he feels it needs to be brought down a few notches, he's done it today. And it is to win that information war against all that hype about 15th being the D-Day, right? I for once agree with our Chinese friend that this is not ending soon. It can be ratcheted up any time later, and I see that ratcheting up happening in the Donbass region, right?
Absolutely.
Only about a few marginal troops withdrawal. There are still 130,000 out there. They can be brought in very quickly. As to the Ukrainian resistance, please, let's be realistic militarily. You take a bean count. Russia is not a country that has not fought wars before. They are very combat hardened people, right? And I don't think it will be a contest at all.
That's true.
Please go by what Professor Mearsheimer says. Why should Russia invade? Russia will wreck Ukraine. Quick in and quick out. What did we do in Bangladesh? Did we fight for every town? Did we hold the ground? 13 days it was over. That is how it would look like.
If it happens. The interesting thing is Putin isn't speaking much. Biden speaks a lot. He talks about things going crazy very quickly. I think Biden should also be measured in his words. And yes, to an extent, Russia has, without firing a single shot, put the world on the edge. Very interesting game plan going on here. Ladies and gentlemen, I've really enjoyed that chat. So Vladimir, Brian, Nikolai, Andrew, George Beeb, Dov Zakim, Alina, Mr. Vasil and General Bakshi, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, continuing coverage here on Republic on what's happening there. A lot of inputs coming in from the ground. On debate 1, Vidhi Kumar says, beat anyone, basic uniform at schools and colleges is a must. It brings equality. I agree. And Priyam says, absolutely loving the Russia-Ukraine coverage. We hope you will launch Republic Global soon so that we can get the simple India take on different global affairs. Matter of time, Priyam. And I shall see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Good night and goodbye.